Thank you very much, David, and welcome to this morning, and welcome to steamy London, which seems to have acquired the climate as well as the politics of Latin America in recent times. Hopefully we're going to get some good ideas here, because we have with us Andreas Schleicher, who I think is probably recognised as one of the most important thinkers and researchers in international education in the entire world at the moment. And for an event like this, there couldn't be a more appropriate expert, because the OECD sits across that bridge between education, economics, employment, and how those interact and how those can be mutually beneficial. So I think we're very lucky to have Andreas here with us, and he's someone who also is at the heart of the PISA process of comparing standards of education in different countries. Apart from terrifying education ministers around the world who worry that they're going to slip down the rankings and be seen as failing, it's also a way of focusing attention on what really works. And in a way, you need to make these international comparisons to really see where you stand. And part of this is about what it means for future economies. What does it mean for the world of work, for young people who are leaving school, college and university in the years ahead? So perhaps the theme here, I suppose, is about how well or how badly we make the transition from education into work, what we should be doing better, what works. Just to begin, I'd like to ask Andreas why it is we have this endless question. We could have been here 10, 20 years ago asking, why is there this mismatch between the skills that young people leave schools and colleges with and what the world of work, what employers demand? There always seems to be this gap. Could you say why that might be?
Yeah, no, I think that, the lowest hanging fruit really is to tell young people the truth. Yeah, it's true, you have about a third of workers in the UK who are overqualified, formally speaking. That looks dramatic, and that's what people talk about. But when we tested the actual skills of the workforce, we found it was less than 1 in 10 workers in the UK who was actually better skilled than what he or she needed to be for her job. So the picture is a lot less dramatic when you look at the actual skills. The same story is when you look at this over time, you have seen this huge rise and people getting more and more degrees, university degrees and so on. But again, the truth is that young people moving into the labor market in the UK are not really better skilled than those moving out of retirement in a very different kind of world. So I think the mismatch problem is largely a signaling issue. We are not very, very good in giving young people good signals about what they know, what they can do. Qualifications, so building a more coherent qualification system that puts academic education, vocational education truly on par, I think is a big part of the answer to this, to the skills mismatch issue.
This is a low-hanging fruit, basically just having better signaling systems and being more honest and open about what actually is what matters. Giving people a better picture of the skills that are needed. Young people. It's very hard for a young person to figure out, because the institutions that educate people have no inherent incentives to be clear.
Can I bring you back to one point there? You said something very interesting when you said that people now leave college and school and university with much better qualifications than they once would have had. Sorry. And but at the same time, you say they had no better skills, and when they're assessed, the previous generations who had fewer qualifications know as many things. How is that? Is that a flaw of the qualifications, or is that a flaw of what they're taught?
Maybe a bit of both, but I do think the qualifications are a big part of the issue. The signals that we give people, what they can do, what we certify, isn't really related to what enables them to be successful and mirroring the skills. I think there's no doubt that there has been quite a big amount of inflation. And the inflation has been very distorted. It's been very much on the academic sector, whereas the kind of vocational skills, we over-recognize academic qualifications and we undervalue skills that you obtain in the labor market. Now, it's very hard to actually quantify what you have as experience that you've gained, and that's what ultimately employers value. But it's also this is the easy part to solve, building a better qualification system. And I think the skills plan, which the UK just launched, in July, it's a good step. It's easy to say, hard to do, but I think that's a good plan. The guidance question is very important. Where do people actually get a picture of the real world? If teachers, who come from the academic world move back into schools, they're probably not the best people to tell young people about the world of work. That's why I really like the work of education employers, giving children early in their careers a picture of how the world looks, and then they can make their own choices, and then they can sort of put much more value in studying the relevant things and the right things. And this guidance question you can extend sort of throughout people's career. I think that's another big part of the. And something's easy to fix. The real hard questions, when it comes to closing the skills gap, is about employer engagement. How do you bring sort of employers truly to the table? Easy for employers to complain that they don't get factory-ready workers, but this is not a problem that governments can solve alone. Employers, when you look at the countries doing this well, are a very, very important part of the picture.
And what are the factors that improve the alignment between industry, employers and education? What are the factors that make that work better?
I think the biggest factor is work-based learning, high quality, and at the OECD we sort of ask for very few things to be mandatory, but that's one of the things that we really think it should be mandatory. High quality work-based learning that is quality assured, that is credit bearing, very, very important. How do I get recognized for this? And that is put on par with learning at the university. And in fact, where this is happening, Switzerland is a great example. I know you talked about this yesterday. You give young people a choice at age, 14, 15, 16. You work for a high-quality apprenticeship or a university, and the majority of people actually prefer that work-based route, because what we know is that the integration of the world of work and the world of learning is a much more powerful way for skill development, not qualifications, than just choosing one or the other. So I think that's hard to achieve. The first two issues, guidance and qualifications, is really something that I don't think there's any apology for not doing this and doing this now. The employer engagement, you really have to work on. That's about setting, and I don't think, a levy and things like this are the magic key to this.
And when you say work-based learning, do you mean vocational qualifications in the sense of following a path where it might be towards a technical qualification or towards a particular career? Is that how you think of that?
Yeah, I think about it even more broadly. You might be surprised, but I think we should have work-based learning in universities. I do think in any form of career development, in any form of learning, learning with real people, learning with real workplaces. We talk about 21st century skills. No? Everybody talks about this today, but where do you learn them? Communication, collaboration. Do you learn this when you sit behind a desk in a single row in a school and a teacher talks to you? No, you learn that when you work with real people. And I sincerely believe we should get rid of this idea that, this is something vocational education. We don't do these kind of things in academic education. I sincerely believe that work-based learning should be part and parcel of any learning process. It's not the sole part of it, but that's why we say it should be mandatory, should be credit-bearing, and it should be quality assured. That's also very important, One of these things when we talk about vocational education, everybody promotes it for other people's children. This is quite true, unfortunately. And I think part of the reason is that we spend huge amount. We have huge incentives for people to go to university. The amount being spent per graduate are enormous. And then we think, vocational education, that can be done in a small enterprise. We leave people on their own. We don't train them properly. If we want to make this work, we have to make the same investment, financially, quality assurance to make it happen.
It's almost in the words, isn't it, that training is seen as something less prestigious than education, which is seen as being an intellectual pursuit rather than a practical one.
I don't like the word training really very much. I think this is about learning, and it's about education. All of those processes should not. This divide between, on the one hand there's abstract academic learning, and on the other hand there's sort of low-level practical training. I think that is also no longer reflecting the reality. There are no longer, if you become a car mechanic these days, electronics and engineering and design are a very important part of the process there. And the same, if you become, what's the most abstract profession? You become a professor of philosophy, you got to know how to manage a department. I think in the reality these worlds have already integrated, And we keep them artificially apart in the design of our school systems and education systems.
You mentioned about the importance of guidance, and careers has been a very thorny topic, certainly in this country. Are there any examples of where you think in the world people get it right, where there's a good model of careers education that we might want to look at?
And I think the countries where there are the defined choices are naturally better placed in doing this, where students have to make certain choices at certain ages. It's easy to do when people make the transitions. In my view, that is far too late. If you do become an engineer at age 20, if you have missed out important parts of your earlier learning, and this is something I think, again, education employers are doing this in primary schooling, maybe in kindergarten. There are sort of initiatives where, and this is not about vocational education in primary schooling, absolutely not. It's about giving young people an idea how diverse the world of work looks like, what the options are, what the possibilities are. So they get a sense, well, if I really want to get this job, I have to study hard to get this kind of skills. And I think we miss that. And why do we miss that? Because teachers and school psychologists and all these people are not really well placed to talk about the world of work. And the industry...
Wait, if you were to intervene in a way that was going to improve it, there are plenty of schemes where people offer things like mentoring and advice. But do you think there needs to be somebody in the school who's permanently a contact for employers? So what sort of framework would actually allow those up-to-date bits of information arrive in a useful form for people to learn about what their choices might be?
Yeah, bringing people into schools, again, has the risk that in a few years those people will be isolated from the world of work, because the world of work changes dramatically. I really think, rather than creating a new post in a school, it's about bringing people from the world of work on a regular basis into school. One of the things, Nick Chambers is here, what I really like, they put an ad on the internet and say, well, you volunteer a couple of hours per year to actually help children in schools understand your own job, and you are the best person to explain your own job. Those are the kind of initiatives, if we would do this more systematic, career fairs in schools, I think we could do a lot to actually at least create a vision for schools that learning is much broader than going to another education institution. And then you can think about, career guidance. I think, again, it is a separate profession. I don't think you can do that on top of your day job as a teacher or as a school psychologist. You really have to make sure that those people have enterprise experience. And at the same time that trainers in companies have pedagogical qualifications. That's equally important. Again, integrating those fields.
And also in addressing the skills mismatch, do we need a more consistent approach from government in coordination with industry? Because I think an experience that would be common to most people is the sense that the system's being pulled in different directions. As you mentioned, there's investment in university support at the same time. The CBI this week said that there's a tremendous problem with employers not being able to recruit adequate high-skilled workers. And we have a system which seems to reward one thing, but at the same time calling for something else. Is there a sort of a need for a more consistent approach that would link through the different phases of education and also link education with industry as well?
Yeah, I think there's several things that governments are really well placed to do. Having sort of a coherent, simple qualification system, I think, is the easiest thing. And that is a very powerful device that people know, what are the skills that count and where can I get them. But also, when you think about employer engagement, there's a lot that governments can do to facilitate this. Employer engagement, apprenticeships, all of these things are easy in a large enterprise. And they actually are not doing a bad job on this. It's so hard to do this in small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the majority of employers. But you look to Norway, for example. There they build a platform where employers can work together to do this. Or Switzerland, where they share apprentices. You can't train an apprenticeship on your own as an employer. Well, work with somebody else in a network. And this is what governments can do. They can fund those kinds of arrangements. They can reward work-based learning. They can create incentives for employers and institutions to work on a systematic basis. I think there's a role and that I think is very, very important. The overall incentive structures. I know these days they raise tuition fees in universities, and there's a lot of discussion about the level of those fees. Well, we are always sort of thinking, well, one part of the education system should actually be free, and the other part we leave for employers to worry about. I think we should have a better view on, what is the contribution different qualifications, different skills make to our societies, and how do we align the resources that go into this with those rewards. How should the costs and benefits of education be properly shared between government, employers, and individuals across the board, not just in one prestigious sector like higher education. I think there is a big role for governments to create a level playing field.
You mentioned earlier about how much the world of work is changing, and technology drives that, and also, I suppose, globalization as well as part of that, and growing competition within the economy and a global economy. I've read something you've written recently about how work has become a much tougher place, more hostile environment for young people. Can you say a bit more about that, and how you think that changes how we should help young people enter the workplace?
Yeah, I think the world and youth transitions are no doubt becoming more complex, more protracted. Now, there's no longer sort of a clear-cut thing, I learned something for life and I'm going to get a job for life. 10, 20 years from now, will there be something like employment? We think about, informal work and employment is a big issue for developing countries. It may actually become a very big issue for our nation. I think the reality of workplaces changes. The reality of skills that are required for success changes. Now, one of the dilemmas for public policy is that the kind of things that are easy to teach, maybe easy to test, are precisely the things that are also easy to digitize, automate, and outsource. Now, where you actually see the big job losses today is not, low skills versus high skills. It's about, routine cognitive skills versus the kind of creative problem-solving interpersonal skills. And this really suggests that, again, the world of work is becoming increasingly important, because when we talk about, character qualities like, resilience, curiosity, leadership, which we know are rising in importance, you are best developing those in places where you can exercise them. And that's where I think we need to acknowledge that this transition is becoming more protracted, more complex, and respond to this, not by, and get away from a vision, we prepare people once, people run for 30 years to get something in education and then they're out on their own. The idea of lifelong, life-wide learning really needs to become a reality.
Do you think we should be taking exams in curiosity rather than geography?
I think, whether it's an exam, I think we should be better at recognizing those kinds of elements. And in one way, your country is a great example. If you go to one of these, great private schools, that are delivering fantastic results, this is not about 3 points more in math. This is not about 3 points more in language or history. They are exactly giving young people those character qualities that make them so much more successful to getting a job and so much more successful to succeed in a job. So in a way, we are trapping a large part of the population by not focusing enough on what really matters for success. And
when you said a couple of minutes ago, you said that you said something very interesting. You said that there might not be employment. But what do you mean by that? Do you mean that all of us are going to be out of a job, or how we think about work is going to change?
I do think that is already something that's happening. The world of work is, you think about in your country, 0-hour contractors now. People, are very skeptical about it because we are managing them very badly. Or you think Uber and the taxi industry is, again, it's a good example where public policy doesn't know how to deal with this, how to tax those people and so on. But the nature of Airbnb, eBay, the e-economy, all of those things exist. We have no ways, no tools for public policy at the moment to deal with them. And but I think that is something that requires an entirely different skill set. If you know how technology companies hire people today, they don't care very much about degrees, qualifications. They're very, very good in actually observing what contribution people can make. And I think we don't, in a way, it's very difficult to anticipate the evolution of skill demand. I really think it's a hard task. But on the other side, I think we are almost closing our eyes at the moment by not even starting to develop tools and suggesting to young people that it's in their best interest, to spend all their first 30 years in one thing.
Mm-hmm. And if when you're here visiting us there's another reshuffle, and they ask you to be Education Secretary, what would you do if you were looking at how our system operates? What would you say is a practical recommendation to address a problem which comes up again and again and again? Schools produce people with qualifications, employers say they're not what we want different skills, and as you say, the Uberization of parts of the workforce changes the nature of work. What would you say, how would you suggest, here's my top tip to make things better?
You know, actually the skills plan that was just published, I think is a really great sort of way to address the issues. Now, but again, you know, it's easy to sort of say what you do, and it's hard to do what you say. You know? And but I think that's a great plan. You know, if I had to say about it, you know, I wouldn't start at age 16, but I would start at primary schooling. I really think it's about trajectories. It's about building the kind of. It's not, you know, how do I pick someone up when they're 16 and route them to the right qualification. Even though I think that's part of the answer. I think this is a great way. If this is implemented, I think you have a good chance of raising the quality of apprenticeships, of building a fewer, clearer pathways in education. All of those things, I think, are on the right track. But my sense is really that what is missing in the UK is an early start in all of this. It's basically, you know, you have a school system that is largely disconnected from what happens at 14, 15, 16. And I think, I really think that's an area where you need to
Are we
start.
unusual in that? If you look at the international field, are we unusually bad at that?
In Europe, I would say yes. On a global scale, I think in the English-speaking world, that is pretty typical. A country that is doing better in that world is Australia, perhaps. But I think, and in Asia, they are doing a lot worse in the sense that there is basically the vocational education is just beginning to rise. But I think clearly the UK could do a lot more in this field.
I think a phrase you used before, you know, maybe distill some of these ideas. As you say, the schools at the moment assess people on what people know, whereas you think that the important thing for work is that how people apply that knowledge is what they do with what they know. If you were to take that as a principle, how would you practically put that into a school or a university so that in fact it delivered the results you think would be better than just assessing pure knowledge? How do you do that? What difference would we see?
Yeah, you know, we did something really interesting. We surveyed teachers in England and asked them, you know, what pedagogical ideas they are important to them. And you get really a very, very strong support for a very constructivist approach to education. You know, students should learn by their own before I tell them the solutions, you know. Skills are more important than curriculum content. That's what teachers think should be done and think that's what they're doing. When we actually looked at this from the student lens, through the PISA test, what type of tasks are UK students good at? Actually, in the UK, students do more rote learning than in China. And that's something that is really sort of the opposite of the image that teachers themselves is. And now, you know, you can ask, how do you close the gap? There is a perception, you know, I'm teaching, you know, open-ended problem solving in my classroom. And the reality is what students do is very shallow, wide, kind of narrow knowledge. And then, you know, we criticize the Chinese for rote learning, and what we see is they are much better on rigor, they are much better on, you know, focus, teaching few things well, and on coherence, building meaningful learning progressions. So what is this disconnect? And I think, again, it comes to if my perception of what I'm doing in a classroom isn't really corresponding with what's actually happening, I will never change. You know, building better ways for, you know, professional collaboration, getting teachers on board of that mission of what is the world of work going to look like? What are the kind of knowledge and skills that are going to matter for student success? And this is a debate, again, when you come to employer engagement, it's not just about delivery of education. Curriculum design, you know, this is something that the whole of society should be thinking about. You know, what is it that young people should be learning? Employers are not the only part of the answer because they're not very good what's needed in the long run. They can tell you what they need today, but not what they need tomorrow. So I think you need to bring multiple perspectives into this. But again, if that would happen, you know, you put teachers on board, employers on board, the research community on board, I think you could get a better picture and close the gap of what happens early in the careers of students.
One of the interesting things about Andreas' work with the OECD is he's shown in some ways that these things are choices, that there's a sort of assumption sometimes that certain countries are better at something, that they have a cultural predisposition to be clever. People say China, they do very well because they have a cultural education. And Andreas' work has shown that often that really isn't the case, and that these are conscious choices. And do you think that sometimes we have a sort of almost a fear of being able to grasp these things, that we think some things are inevitable, things will always be this way, and that in fact the countries that have improved very rapidly with their education systems, whether it is parts of China or Vietnam or Poland or some of these other countries that have improved, have actually sort of decided they can break the mold, they can do things differently, and we're fearful of doing that somehow.
Yeah, I'm the last person to deny the importance of culture, but I think we have to ask ourselves always, to what extent is culture inherited, it's a context, we can't really do something about it, or to what extent is culture created by what we do today. I give you an example. We ask in the PISA test, we will ask one students, what do you believe is going to make you successful in mathematics? And we had a majority of students in England telling you, wow, it's clear, it's about talent. If I'm not born as a genius, I better study something else. So the idea is basically, the education system is just going to grind me through a mill and I'm going to come out in some ways, and I have no influence over this. You ask that same question to a student in Singapore and in China, and you have 9 out of 10 telling you, if I study really, really hard, I trust my teacher is going to help me and I'm going to be successful. And what do you see? Children from all social backgrounds actually do succeed. So some people say, well, that's culture. I would argue that is exactly how the system works. That's how it sets its incentives. Having high expectations for everyone, opening doors rather than routing people. I think there's a lot that we attribute to culture that we could be changing. And one of the points of evidence for this is, if culture would be everything, we would be seeing the same picture year after year, decade after decade. But you look at the United States, #1 in the 1960s, now below the OECD average. Not because they became worse, but because everybody else became so much faster, better. And I think that's something that we have to take to heart, that there's a lot of room for public policy to actually make a difference.
Now, if you took the example of something like South Korea, South Korea only a couple of generations ago had the highest rate of illiteracy in the world, had the lowest literacy levels. Now it's at the very top of international education rankings.
And they didn't change their culture. They changed what they did in education.
That's within 50 years. They went from bottom to top.